Most people are dead wrong about Jesus. I'm going to tell you what my position is and all the problems I have with all the typical positions people take on Jesus. First, as you may have guessed, I don't buy into the religious view of Jesus for obvious reasons. Next is the Jesus as a myth conspiracy theory. Just look at their claims. Most of them are wrong. Just look up the different gods and read about them. You will see that Jesus did not get copied from them. There are very few similarities. There is also no evidence for any link between astrology and Jesus or the Bible. Finally, there is the historical Jesus of the Bible scholars. I will be explaining the problems I have with that while I explain my position and provide my evidence and reasoning for it. Bible scholars seem to think pretty much everything about Jesus is right aside from the miracles and divinity stuff. That is the short version of their take on it. My take on it is that we don't know for sure. There was this legend that came from somewhere. It may have been one single guy who was a Jewish apocalyptic street preacher from the early 1st century, or perhaps it was a group of these Jewish apocalypticists. It may have been a combination of that, like it was a group or just that type of preacher in general, but there was one guy who more of this legend was based on than the others. Even if it was just one single guy, he would have been completely unremarkable, no different from any of the other apocalyptic preachers who were quite common at that time. Let's start with what we know for sure. Jews believed in the age to come, an eternal golden age after this temporary earthly kingdom ends by about 100 BCE at the latest, according to Bible scholar Robert Henry Charles. The Old Testament is also filled with prophecies. The apocalyptic sects of Judaism, which are the ones that focused on the age to come, quickly gained popularity during the Roman occupation from 63 BCE to 135 CE. Apocalypticism was extremely popular and common in the 1st century. Apocalyptic street preachers were very common. The birth of Jesus, according to the Bible, was either before 4 BCE, as indicated by Matthew 2:1 and Luke 1:5, which say during Herod's reign, and Herod died in 4 BCE, or after 6 CE, as indicated by the events in Luke 2:1. The Bible said Jesus was crucified under Pontius Pilate. That means it had to have been between 26 and 36 CE. He was supposed to have started his ministry at age 30, and it lasted for 3 years. The only thing all the Gospels seem to agree on that is the most concrete is the Pontius Pilate link. It's hard to say when Jesus was born, how old he was, or how long his ministry lasted because of all the contradictions. You can go to skepticsannotatedbible.com and click on Contradictions to see all biblical contradictions. We can be sure the Bible is clear in its claim that Jesus died anywhere from 26 to 36 CE. Just give the historical Jesus as much leeway as possible, and let's say he died in 36. At this time, I would also like to state that the vast majority of my knowledge of Bible scholarship comes from the writings of Dr. Bart Ehrman, especially the book Jesus Interrupted. Pardon my digression, but that book also goes over contradictions and is an excellent source of information. It does break down into speculation and excuses at the end, but such is Bible scholarship in certain areas. It's very well written and I highly recommend it. Okay, digression over. The Gospels would have come from oral traditions, then they were written down later. When you compare Matthew and Luke, the part of those two that agree may be a lost gospel called Q. This comes from the two-source hypothesis which most Bible scholars, as well as myself, think is the most likely. The scholars are not all happy with the Q theory, mainly due to the book's disappearance. The Q document is mainly just a bunch of sayings of Jesus. I think it could be that the document was not lost so much as absorbed by Matthew and Luke. The other source is the Gospel of Mark. This would have been kept because neither Matthew nor Luke used everything out of Mark. Giving the existence of Q as a given is as generous as I can be due to how early it was written. It could have been written as early as 60 CE, possibly even a couple years before that. That would put it around the time Paul of Tarsus was writing the books for his ministry, which later ended up in the Bible. So these sayings of Jesus could be at best 20 years after his death. These are just sayings, too. There's nothing about his life. That did not happen until 69 or 70 when Mark was written. So 33 years after the fact, at a bare minimum, is the first writings about the life of Jesus. The oral tradition of Jesus dates back to the 30s or early 40s. We know this because of what Paul of Tarsus says about his conversion. So, not only do you have legend growing from this oral tradition, but it is also of a religious nature, making it more susceptible to people embellishing it. Paul of Tarsus converted to this sect supposedly in the 30s, but by the 40s at the latest, and was likely in at the beginning. Since he is a believer and wrote books of the Bible, you can't really put his testimony any higher than the Bible itself. You know how things go with urban legends. Things can spring up very quickly. When you compare how you first heard it with how someone told you later, you will notice it is different. The teller will always insist it happened to someone they know. Now, imagine this going on for 2 or 3 decades among a bunch of superstitious primitives who are also mostly illiterate. More evidence for the legend is the way they tried to insert Jesus into recent history. There are contradictions about his timeline. Click on Contradictions at skepticsannotatedbible.com to examine these and other Bible contradictions. Or you can also read Jesus Interrupted and other books by Dr. Bart Ehrman.